It's Dickie's 12th birthday, which means it's also time for him to take his government-issued intelligence test. His parents think their extraordinary child will do very well, and unfortunately for them, that's exactly what they're scared of. This episode of the Twilight Zone is called Examination Day, and the ending is so messed up. It's Dickie's 12th birthday, which also means it's examination time. He's confident he'll do fine. He gets good grades, and all the kids at school say it's super easy, but that's exactly what his parents are worried about. Dickie is the sort of child who asks a lot of questions. He reads instead of watching TV, and he's even excited to take a test. And even though they try to ignore their fears so they don't worry him, they know their child's weakness is that he's extraordinary. Eventually, they bring him to the examination center, they give him a truth serum, and finally it's time for him to take the test. We know he's finished when his parents receive a call from the government, and unfortunately, Dickie's been killed for exceeding the government's intelligence level. Now, his parents have the option to have his body returned home, or if they want a private burial. This was so sad because it seems like everyone around Dickie had an idea of what was going to happen except for him. He was so excited and even made afternoon plans on the day of his test. At first, I was upset that his parents didn't prepare him for this moment, but then I thought about the truth serum and how maybe they'd get in trouble if the government found out they were deliberately making sure he wouldn't pass the test. Also, I started thinking how if they made sure he wasn't smart until he was 12, it might be too late to reverse what has already been done once the test was complete. And I completely understand why they didn't want to damage their child's mental development that way. This episode highlights how society treats people who think differently. In the society, people were punished for being too smart because I'm guessing the government didn't want people around who could outsmart them and overthrow them. They wanted to remain in control, and so they created a society where everyone was too oblivious to notice what was happening around them. It makes me wonder how this all started. What steps did the government take before killing off people who were smarter than the ones in control? Did it start with eliminating homework and tests? Maybe it started with teaching misinformation and disguising it as the truth. This episode made me wonder how easy it would be to brainwash society if given the power, and if it's low-key happening right now and we don't even realize it. When 4-year-old Debbie gets fed up with her parents' constant arguing and neglect, she takes them to the children's zoo. Her parents think it'll be a fun little trip for Debbie. Little do they know that once they go in, there's only one way out. Debbie is sick of her parents constantly arguing and yelling at each other, so when she gets an invitation to the children's zoo, she knows her parents will be the perfect additions. Even though her mom doesn't think she deserves to go, her father thinks otherwise. And yes, he tries to weasel his way out of joining this family outing, but the invitation says both parents must accompany the child. And after a short car ride, filled with yelling and cursing, they finally reach the children's zoo. While Debbie heads through the children's entrance, her parents are led to the parents' waiting room, where Debbie will meet them after her tour. But the moment Debbie enters the zoo, we see that the children's zoo is unlike any zoo we've ever seen, because instead of animals behind the glass, there are parents. Parents who have been brought here by their kids. Parents who are neglectful, who argue and make their kids feel uncomfortable and unloved. As inhabitants of the children's zoo, they must learn to reconcile and become the best parents they can be, or risk being trapped here forever. And the only way out is to be chosen by a child who's looking for a new set of parents to take them home. And after going through all the parents, angry parents, aggressive parents, and even disingenuous parents who promise Debbie everything from candy for breakfast to a pony, Debbie finds a calm and loving couple who've learned their lesson and are ready to be the best parents they can be. And so, she takes them home and leaves her biological parents behind. This episode of The Twilight Zone was actually so wild, but it raises a really important discussion on childhood neglect. And I also think it was interesting how adoption was depicted. Debbie may have had all the clothes and toys she desired, but the one thing she wanted was to feel loved. Her parents were too focused on hating each other that they forgot to love their child. And even though she wasn't neglected in a stereotypical way, she was fed, she was housed, she was clean, she wasn't physically abused, Debbie was still neglected emotionally, which is something I feel is often overlooked. This episode made me see the idea of adoption in a different light. It made me wonder how the process is really like in real life. Do you really just go in a room and choose a child like you're picking out a pet? How does it actually work? I completely understand the idea of adoption, the idea of a couple genuinely wanting a child to love and care for, and for whatever reason, they are not able to have a child biologically. But the idea of going to a place and choosing a child like they're an animal makes me feel a little weird. It makes me wonder how many kids out there have adapted the same behaviors as the parents in the zoo. How many kids out there understand that they must put on an act of obedience and innocence in order to be chosen. This episode not only highlights the objectification of children that's involved in adoption, happen, but it made me question the ethics behind it. I understand there's both good and bad to the situation, but after watching this episode, it really made me think. When a massive power outage shocks the residents of Maple Street, the people slowly convince themselves that the new neighbors are responsible, and as their suspicions grow, they start to believe that everything happening is actually an orchestrated terror attack. The residents of Maple Street are holding a community meeting when an earthquake shakes the neighborhood, eventually causing a town-wide power outage. Even weirder, none of the phones are working and the cars won't start. One of the residents, named Phyllis, has a husband who works on an army base, and he told her that this is exactly what would happen during a terrorist attack. And because of this, everyone starts to believe that they are in the midst of one right now and that the new neighbors are the ones responsible. Not only did the new neighbors show up in the middle of the night, but nobody has met them, they're not adhering to social and stylistic norms of the community, they don't involve themselves in any community events, and they didn't even come outside to see what was going on after the earthquake and power outage. Not to mention, they're the only ones in the neighborhood with a working car and electricity. Something about them is suspicious. That's when one of the residents uncovers a spy camera by his home. Believing that there are more planted in every house, the residents become desperate. They surround their new neighbors, trash their house, and burn it down while their new neighbors are inside. They're too outraged to notice the truck parked close by. Inside this truck are soldiers, waiting and watching to see the results of their social experiment unfold. Turns out, this was all a test created by the army to determine how long it would take isolated communities to crumble during a real terrorist attack, and they're disappointed to find that it only took 5 hours. These neighbors were honestly just a bunch of haters. This episode highlights the dangers of groupthink. It shows how easily people are persuaded in an effort to avoid conflict within their social units. At the end of the episode, it's explained that during uncertain times when a perceived villain exists, the masses will create one themselves even if they can't find one. In this episode, the residents experience groupthink in an effort to explain a phenomenon they cannot understand, and attacked anyone who didn't follow the hive mind. They believed they were in danger, and because they couldn't pinpoint exactly where that danger was coming from, they created an explanation without having proof. It's almost as if their effort to place blame was based more on societal acceptance and to blend into the hive than it was for survival. And I just thought that was interesting because I see this happening across social media all the time. Someone will make a comment, state a belief or thought process, and the masses will run with it, often reiterating that same point over and over again in order to gain social acceptance by an audience. And it's scary because since social media has expanded our social circles worldwide, so have the effects of groupthink. Norma and Arthur are broke, so imagine their shock when they're told they can get $200,000 just for pressing a button. There's just one little catch. If they press the button, someone they don't know will die. This episode of the Twilight Zone is called Button Button, and by the end, it forces the audience to decide how far they're willing to go for money. Norma kind of hates her life. Her car broke down and now she has to walk everywhere. She seems miserable in her marriage with Arthur. This is just not the life she wanted for herself. That's when a mysterious package shows up on their doorstep. Inside is a button, and it doesn't take long for a man in a suit to show up with the instructions. If she presses the button, she gets $200,000 tax-free. The only catch is that someone she doesn't know will die. Norma thinks this is a no-brainer and wants to press the button, but her husband thinks otherwise. The person they kill could be someone's newborn baby. And after a grueling 24-hour internal debate, Norma presses the button. And after she gets her money, it's time for her to give the button back. That's when she's told that whoever gets it will be offered the same deal as they were. And even scarier, whoever gets it will be someone she doesn't know. There's a theme of selfishness and greed at the core of this episode, especially when it concerns a selfishness involving lack of empathy. Norma didn't live a luxurious lifestyle, and her issues only resulted in minor inconveniences. As far as we know, greed was her only motivation. This episode really made me reflect on society and its startling lack of empathy. At the beginning of the episode, Norma believed that $200,000 was more than enough for a human life. She was so overcome with the idea of fulfilling her own desires that She didn't care what the consequences were as long as they had no effect on her. She didn't care that someone across the world would be grieving for a death she caused. If it didn't affect her, then it didn't matter to her. And it wasn't until the end, when a price tag was put on her life, where she finally realized exactly what she'd done. Suddenly she began to worry about how many people out there were exactly just like her. Suddenly she realizes the importance of understanding, of empathy, of thinking about others, and just how much a simple decision can affect the world at large.